The Exilari Dominion had conquered over 100 worlds, their expansion as inevitable as the tide. Their arrival in the Sol system was not a question of if, but when. They came with an armada, massive, angular warships the size of cities, their hulls bristling with energy cannons that had reduced entire planets to smoldering ruins. Their message to Earth was simple: submit, and your species will be allowed to serve. Resist, and you will be erased. Most civilizations in the galaxy surrendered before the first shot was fired. The Exilari had crushed races far more advanced than humanity, and to them, Earth was just another backwater world ripe for assimilation. But instead of fear, they were met with something unexpected: silence. For an entire day, Earth's leaders did not respond. The Exilari commanders, confident in their dominance, assumed it was hesitation, a planet teetering on the brink of surrender. They did not realize that deep beneath the surface, in hidden military bunkers and underground command centers, humanity was already preparing for war. The first attack did not come from space. It came from Earth itself. As the Exilari fleet drifted into orbit, expecting the usual terms of surrender, thousands of missiles launched from hidden silos. Stealth fighters scrambled from underground hangars, their engines screaming as they ripped through the sky. Satellites armed with railguns, once secret experimental projects, turned their sights to the enemy. The Exilari were caught off guard. No species had ever dared to attack first. No species had ever chosen annihilation over submission. The first explosions erupted across the fleet, shattering smaller vessels and crippling the Exilari command ship. The Dominion's war doctrine was built around overwhelming force, not defending against an enemy that fought like a cornered predator with nothing to lose. Within minutes, Earth's skies became a war zone. Exilari dropships, expecting a peaceful descent, were torn apart by precision strikes. Infantry units that had prepared to march through conquered cities instead found themselves in burning wreckage, surrounded by human soldiers wielding weapons scavenged from downed enemy ships. The Exilari retaliated with devastating orbital bombardments. Cities burned. Millions perished in the first hours. But humanity did not break. They adapted. They learned. Every battle became a lesson. Every fallen soldier fueled the next counterattack. By the time the Exilari realized their mistake, Earth had already turned into something new, a battlefield where the invaders were the prey. As the Exilari High Command watched their forces struggle against a species they had underestimated, one unsettling realization dawned upon them. This was not going to be another easy conquest. This was going to be a war. And humanity had just made it very clear. They would rather burn their world to ashes than kneel. The Exilari Dominion had waged war for centuries. They had crushed empires, shattered civilizations, and rewritten history in their own image. Yet, against humanity, they found something terrifying: a species that refused to die. After the first wave of destruction, the Exilari expected Earth's forces to collapse. Instead, resistance only grew stronger. In the ruins of fallen cities, survivors banded together, forming underground networks. Civilians became soldiers. Engineers worked day and night, salvaging alien wreckage and reverse engineering enemy technology. Even in the face of orbital firepower, humanity adapted at a speed the Exilari had never seen before. They had faced defiance before, but not like this. Humanity did not fight for survival alone. They'd fought to win. Guerrilla warfare on a galactic scale. The Exilari war doctrine was built on swift, overwhelming force. Their fleets would descend, crush any resistance, and establish total control within days. But Earth turned the war into a nightmare of attrition. Exilari patrols were ambushed in dense urban landscapes, where every ruined building became a trap. Their supply lines were cut by precision raids, their bases infiltrated by human commandos who learned how to move unseen. Even their warships in orbit found themselves under constant attack, hacked by human cyber warriors who turned their own systems against them. Exilari warlord, overseeing the campaign from high orbit, sneered at the reports. Let them struggle. Their weapons are primitive, their numbers weak. They only delay the inevitable. Then his flagship lost power. For a full hour, the massive vessel drifted helplessly above Earth, its communication scrambled, its weapons locked. When systems were restored, the warlord's screens flickered with a message. We are not fighting for survival. We are fighting to take you down. For the first time, the Xilari Dominion faced an enemy that fought not just with weapons, but with intelligence, innovation, and sheer will. The Battle of the Iron Sky. The turning point came when a small human strike team infiltrated a captured military base in South America. The Xilari had been using it as a planetary command hub, but when the base's automated defenses suddenly turned against them, panic spread. Explosions lit up the night as human forces stormed the facility, striking with ruthless precision. They'd moved like ghosts, using enemy weapons against their makers. By dawn, the base belonged to Earth again. And the prize? A fully intact Xilari warship. Within days, Earth's brightest minds were inside the vessel, tearing apart its secrets. The first human-piloted alien ship took flight soon after, repurposed and deadlier than before. For the Xilari, the realization was chilling. Humanity was not just resisting. They were learning. They were evolving. No species had ever done this before. Across the stars, the Galactic Council watched in disbelief. No civilization had ever fought back this hard against the Xilari. No species had ever adapted at this speed. The Dominion's forces, once confident, now spoke of Earth with a new word in their language, one that did not exist before. The unyielding. The Xilari had come to Earth expecting an easy victory. Instead, they had awakened something far worse. A war they could not control. A fight they might not win. And a species that would never kneel. The war had begun as a one-sided slaughter. The Xilari Dominion, armed with centuries of conquest and unmatched firepower, expected Earth to crumble within weeks. Instead, months passed, then a year, and humanity was not only still standing, they were winning battles, stealing fire from the gods. The captured Xilari warship, now renamed Iron Resolve, became the key to humanity's resurgence. Earth's best engineers and scientists worked around the clock, disassembling and studying its systems. Every piece of alien technology they reverse-engineered gave birth to new innovations, improved weapons, reinforced armor, and more advanced AI-driven combat systems. Within months, Earth's experimental divisions fielded hybrid weapons, human ingenuity fused with Xilari technology. What had once been crude missiles were now precision-guided railguns that could pierce energy shields. Infantry, once reliant on outdated firearms, now wielded energy-based weapons, modified to function even in electromagnetic interference. Human pilots took control of stolen Xilari starfighters, learning to maneuver them in ways their creators never had. With neural-linked interfaces and unpredictable human instincts, these ships became deadlier than ever before. The war was no longer a desperate struggle for survival. It was turning into a contest of superiority. The trap at Titan. Desperate to reassert dominance, the Xilari launched Operation Final Dawn, a massive strike against Earth's last remaining space assets. A fleet of 30 warships descended upon Titan, Saturn's largest moon, where they believed humanity's resistance forces were gathering. But humanity had learned from every battle. They knew the Xilari's tactics. The moment the fleet entered Titan's orbit, they were ambushed. Hidden beneath the icy surface, railgun batteries fired at near light-speed velocities, ripping through the Xilari formations before they could react. Electromagnetic pulses shut down targeting systems, leaving their warships blind and vulnerable. Human-piloted Xilari fighters emerged from Titan's methane clouds, moving unpredictably, striking with pinpoint precision. In just 3 hours, the once mighty fleet was in chaos. Half their ships were destroyed, and the others were forced into retreat. The battle shocked the galaxy. The Xilari, once considered invincible, had just suffered their worst defeat in history. And humanity had made one thing clear. They were no longer the hunted. They were the hunters. The first signs of fear. The Galactic Council, which had remained neutral, now watched Earth with new eyes. Some saw potential allies. Others saw a growing threat. But the Xilari, they saw something worse. Fear. Their warlords, once confident in swift victory, now hesitated. Their officers whispered of human unpredictability, of their terrifying ability to adapt, to fight smarter, to turn the enemy's own technology against them. No species had ever done this. No species had ever made the Xilari question their own dominance. For the first time in centuries, the Xilari Dominion faced a real enemy. And they were beginning to understand the truth. They might not win this war. The fall of the Xilari fleet at Titan sent shockwaves across the stars. The invincible conquerors who had ruled through terror and sheer technological might had been defeated. And not by some ancient empire or powerful coalition. By a single planet. The Galactic Council, a vast assembly of alien civilizations that had long tolerated the Xilari's reign, suddenly found itself divided. Some feared what humanity's rise meant. Others saw opportunity. If the Xilari could bleed, they could be beaten. A divided galaxy. News of Earth's defiance spread like wildfire. Across countless worlds, those who had lived under the Dominion's rule began to question their overlords. Whispers of rebellion turned into open resistance. Slave races, who had never dared to hope for freedom, rose up in defiance. But while the oppressed saw hope, the great empires of the galaxy saw a threat. The Vractari swarm, an insectoid race of conquerors, feared that humanity's tactics could be used against them. The Lutheri Guilds, the galaxy's most powerful corporate syndicate, saw Earth's rapid technological leaps as a disruption to the balance of power. Even the Aelari Ascendancy, one of the oldest and most enlightened species, debated whether humanity's rise should be encouraged or contained. For centuries, the Xilari had been the hammer that kept the galaxy in order. If that hammer was broken, who would take its place? Some factions sent envoys to Earth, offering uneasy alliances. Others prepared contingency plans to deal with humanity before they became unstoppable. But there was one undeniable truth that no one could ignore. Earth was no longer just a battleground. It was the spark that could change the fate of the galaxy. The Xilari's desperation. Back in the heart of the Dominion, the Xilari warlords convened in a state of panic. Never in their history had they suffered such a prolonged war. Never had they faced an enemy that grew stronger with every battle. Their fleets had superior firepower, but Earth's forces were adaptive, unpredictable, and ruthless. Every setback for humanity became an opportunity to improve. Every loss only hardened their resolve. And now, for the first time, the war had spread beyond Earth. Xilari supply routes were under attack by resistance cells on occupied planets. Their manufacturing worlds faced sabotage from human-backed insurgents. The Dominion was no longer just fighting humans. They were fighting a rebellion they could no longer control. Desperate, the Xilari leadership issued a final order. No more invasions, no more demands for surrender. Earth would be purged, not conquered, not enslaved, destroyed. They gathered their remaining armada, thousands of ships, and prepared for a single devastating assault. But they had underestimated humanity one last time. Because Earth wasn't just defending itself anymore. They were preparing to strike back. The Xilari had made their decision. No more diplomacy, no more demands for surrender. Earth was to be erased. Their final assault would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. An armada of thousands of warships, planetary bombardment cannons, and weapons designed to break civilizations. Entire fleets that had once terrorized the stars now converged toward a single target, humanity. But they had made a fatal mistake. By the time their invasion force arrived, Earth was no longer just a planet fighting for survival. It was a war machine. The battle of the void. Months of war had transformed humanity into something far deadlier than the Xilari had ever imagined. Their scientists had cracked Xilari technology, building weapons that could penetrate energy shields and disable warships from light years away. Their soldiers had become specialists in asymmetric warfare, striking with precision, hacking enemy systems, and turning their own machines against them. Their fleets, once laughably primitive, were now hybrids of human ingenuity and alien engineering. And they were no longer alone. The Xilari had spent centuries crushing weaker species beneath their rule. Now, those species had a reason to fight. Rebel fleets, long hiding in the shadows, joined Earth's forces. Saboteurs struck deep inside Xilari territory, disrupting communications, turning allies against them. By the time the Xilari armada reached the Sol system, they were already bleeding. And then the impossible happened. Earth struck first. The trap that shook the galaxy. Using stolen Xilari warp technology, humanity had built a weapon unlike anything before. A fleet of repurposed warships, piloted by human crews, jumped behind enemy lines, striking the Xilari before they could even begin their invasion. Massive Xilari carriers, still preparing for planetary bombardment, were torn apart from within as human infiltration teams detonated their power cores. Warships meant to rain destruction down on Earth instead became their own funeral pyres. Then, humanity unleashed the true terror of war. Using advanced AI-driven tactics, their forces jammed Xilari communications, sending false signals, turning their own ships against each other. Massive orbital railguns, hidden across the asteroid belt, fired at near light speed, shattering capital ships before they even knew they were under attack. By the time the Xilari command realized what had happened, half their fleet was gone. The invincible armada meant to destroy Earth was now a broken, scattered force struggling to survive. And humanity was not done yet. The dawn of a new war. For the first time in history, the Xilari Dominion was losing. Not just a battle, not just a war. Their entire way of life was unraveling. The species they had oppressed now saw a path to freedom. Their enemies saw a chance to strike back. Even their own people, Xilari civilians, tired of endless war, began to question their rulers. And at the center of it all, humanity stood defiant. No longer the underdogs. No longer just survivors. Now, they were the reckoning. And the war for the galaxy was just beginning. The Xilari Dominion had ruled the galaxy for centuries through fear and overwhelming force. Their fleets had burned worlds to ash. Their armies had crushed countless civilizations, and their rule had remained unchallenged. Until now. Humanity had not only survived the war, they had turned it into their war. The shattered remnants of the Xilari armada limped back to their strongholds, their confidence in total supremacy utterly broken. What was once an empire of conquerors had become an empire on the defensive, and humanity was not going to stop. The liberation wars begin. The moment the Xilari's forces retreated, Earth made its decision. They had the momentum. The galaxy was watching. The time for simple survival was over. It was time to break the Dominion. Fleet after fleet, humanity and their newfound allies launched coordinated strikes against Xilari-controlled worlds. These weren't random acts of defiance. These were surgical, precise, and devastating. On Arctos IV, a key Xilari supply world, human commandos hacked into planetary defenses and turned them against their masters. Within hours, the planet was under human control. On Varkish Prime, a world that had been enslaved for centuries, human-led forces freed millions, arming them with captured Xilari weapons. The uprising spread like wildfire. And then came the unthinkable. The first Xilari defectors. For the first time, Xilari soldiers, who had been raised to believe in their absolute superiority, began to question everything. Some abandoned their posts. Others joined humanity, bringing with them secrets of the Dominion's greatest strongholds. A civilization that had been unbreakable for 1,000 years was now fracturing from within. The last stronghold. With world after world slipping from their grasp, the Xilari warlords knew they had one last hope. Their fortress world, Selvatar, a planet-sized fortress at the heart of their empire, guarded by the last of their fleets, shielded by defenses that had never been breached. If humanity wanted to end the war, they would have to do the impossible. Take the unbreakable world. For the first time, the leaders of Earth addressed the entire galaxy. Their message was simple. The time of fear is over. The time of rulers and slaves is over. The Xilari Dominion falls today. The largest armada in human history. A coalition of free species, rebel forces, and human warships. Began its approach toward Selvatar. As the final battle loomed, the question was no longer whether humanity would survive. It was whether the Xilari Dominion would. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the answer was unclear. The war that had begun as humanity's desperate struggle for survival had become something far greater. It was no longer just about Earth. It was about ending tyranny itself. The final battle was at hand. The combined human-led coalition, a force of liberated species, rebel fleets, and Earth's finest warriors, now stood before Selvatar, the last stronghold of the Xilari Dominion. This was the beating heart of the Empire, a fortress world that had never fallen, a place built to withstand invasions from entire civilizations. But it had never faced humanity. The battle begins. The Xilari had gathered everything they had left. Thousands of warships, orbital defense grids, planetary cannons, the last remnants of a once invincible empire. Their warlords still clung to their arrogance, believing that brute force would be enough. But Earth's forces had mastered the art of war. The battle began with a deception. As the coalition fleet engaged the Xilari defenses in high orbit, human stealth ships, using Xilari technology against them, slipped past the outer perimeter. Their target, the planetary shield generators that made Selvatar untouchable. Infiltration teams, a mix of elite human operatives and defected Xilari soldiers, landed undetected within the enemy's defenses. Moving like shadows, they bypassed security systems, using hacked Xilari codes and neural disruption tech to shut down alarms. Then, all at once, every shield across the planet collapsed. Total war. With the planet exposed, the full force of the coalition descended. Drop pods rained from the sky, landing amidst Xilari fortresses that had never before seen ground combat. Human infantry, now wielding hybrid energy weapons, stormed their strongholds, using Xilari's own battle tactics against them. Entire rebel armies, species who had been enslaved for generations, poured into the fight. This was not just humanity's battle anymore. It was the revenge of the entire galaxy. The Xilari, once thought invincible, found themselves outmaneuvered, outgunned, and overwhelmed. And then, in their final act of desperation, they played their last card. The High Warlords of Selvatar, in a final ruthless command, ordered the detonation of their own planet. If they could not rule, they would burn everything with them. The final gambit. With minutes before the detonation sequence completed, Earth's greatest minds worked in overdrive. Hackers and AI systems, already inside the Xilari networks, began the impossible task of overriding the destruction protocol. And just as the countdown reached 3 seconds, the signal was cut. The detonation failed. Humanity had done the unthinkable. They had hacked an entire world and stolen it from its own masters. The Xilari, realizing their last act of defiance had failed, surrendered. Their warlords were captured, their armies broken. The Dominion was finished, but humanity was not done yet. As the last Xilari banners fell, one question remained. What came next? The war was over. The Xilari Dominion, the once unbreakable empire that had ruled the galaxy through fear and conquest, had fallen. Their warlords, now prisoners, sat in silence as humanity and its allies stood over the ruins of what was once the greatest stronghold in history. For the first time in 1,000 years, the galaxy was free. But as the dust settled and the last echoes of battle faded, one question loomed over all. What happens now? A galaxy without chains. Across the stars, liberated worlds erupted in celebration. Civilizations that had lived under Xilari rule for generations now looked to Earth. Would humanity replace the Xilari as rulers of the galaxy? Would they become just another empire, another force of domination? The answer came swiftly. Humanity's leaders, speaking before the entire galactic community, made their stance clear. We did not fight this war for conquest. We fought it for freedom. We fought it because no species should live under the boot of another. The age of empires is over. The galaxy listened. And for the first time, instead of a single dominant power, something new emerged. A coalition of free worlds, bound not by fear, but by choice. The fate of the Xilari. As humanity and its allies established the Galactic Concord, one question remained. What would be done with the Xilari? The suggestion to eradicate them was raised. After all, had they not done the same to countless others? But Earth refused. The future cannot be built on vengeance, they declared. Instead, the Xilari people were given a choice. Live among the free species, learn from the civilizations they had once oppressed, or remain isolated, their empire forever dissolved. Some chose exile. Some, humbled by their defeat, chose to stay. For the first time in their history, the Xilari were not feared. They were equals. The legacy of humanity. The war had forged humanity into something greater than anyone had expected. No longer a minor species from a backwater planet, they had become the catalyst of change, the species that had challenged the gods and won. But they had not done it alone. They had inspired others, forged alliances that would outlive any single war. And so, as humanity's fleets returned home, as the last battle-worn soldiers set foot on Earth, they looked to the stars not as conquerors, but as ascendants. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would humanity. For they had not just survived. They had changed the universe forever.